The girl running through the storm wasn't the kind of girl people usually noticed. At 16 years old, Eleanor Pierce already carried more weight than most girls her age. Her soft, round cheeks were flushed red from the freezing rain. Her larger frame struggled through the mud covering the roadside. Classmates often mocked her appearance. Strangers rarely looked at her twice, and if they did, it was usually with pity or judgment. But none of them knew that within the next few minutes, this overlooked plus-size girl would save the life of a boy destined to become one of the most feared mafia bosses in America. The storm raging outside New York that night was unlike anything Eleanor had ever seen. Thunder shook the sky, rain crashed against the earth, the wind screamed through the trees. Then suddenly, a violent explosion shattered the darkness. Metal twisted, glass erupted, tires screeched, and somewhere beyond the rain, a vehicle crashed into the darkness below. Eleanor froze. Every instinct told her to run, to stay safe, to let someone else help. But what happened next would change 2 lives forever. Because inside that wreckage was a terrified teenage boy. And 15 years later, that boy would become Adrian Moretti, the man politicians feared, the man rivals avoided, the man newspapers never dared write about, the future king of the Moretti crime empire. For a few seconds, Eleanor simply stood there. The storm soaked her oversized jacket. Cold water dripped from her dark hair. Her heart hammered inside her chest. The crash had come from beyond the guardrail, overlooking a steep drainage ditch. Another explosion echoed through the night, this one louder, closer. And suddenly Eleanor realized something terrifying. Someone was still alive down there. Without thinking, she dropped her broken umbrella and ran. Mud splashed beneath her shoes. Branches scraped her arms. Rain blinded her vision, but she kept moving. The deeper she climbed into the ditch, the stronger the smell became. Gasoline, smoke, burning metal. When she finally reached the bottom, her stomach tightened. A black SUV lay upside down in several feet of floodwater. One side was crushed. Smoke poured from the engine. Small flames licked across twisted metal. The vehicle looked seconds away from exploding. Most people would have backed away. Most people would have called emergency services and waited. Eleanor wasn't most people. Despite years of being judged for her appearance, despite years of hearing cruel comments about her weight, despite growing up believing she wasn't important enough for anyone to notice, her heart had always been bigger than her fears, and right now someone needed help. Then she heard it, a weak voice. A boy. Help. The word barely carried through the storm, but Eleanor heard it, and everything changed. Oh my God. She splashed toward the wreckage. Freezing water immediately climbed above her knees. The current pulled at her legs. Broken glass floated around her. Inside the vehicle, she spotted movement. A teenage boy, maybe 15, maybe 16. Blood covered one side of his face. His expensive clothes were soaked. His eyes were wide with panic. For one brief moment, their eyes met, and something strange happened. The boy looked relieved, as if simply seeing another human being made him believe survival was possible. Unfortunately, for both of them, the worst danger was still ahead. A burst of flame erupted beneath the engine. The vehicle groaned. The entire frame shifted. The boy flinched. Fear flooded his face. Eleanor rushed to the rear passenger door. Locked. She pulled harder. Nothing. The door refused to move. Damn it. She searched frantically. Then spotted a broken section of steel guardrail nearby. Running through the freezing water, she grabbed it with both hands. It was heavy, far heavier than she expected. Her arms trembled, her shoulders burned, but adrenaline pushed her forward. The first strike shattered part of the side window. The second strike widened the opening. The third finally created enough space. Inside the vehicle, the boy stared at her in disbelief. Rain streamed down Eleanor's face. Her larger frame was shaking from exhaustion. Mud covered her clothes. Her breathing came in ragged gasps. She looked nothing like the heroes in movies. Yet somehow she was the bravest person he had ever seen. "Can you move?" she shouted. The boy swallowed. "I think so. You need to crawl toward me. It hurts." "I know." His lower lip trembled. For all his expensive clothes, for all the wealth surrounding him, for all the bodyguards that usually followed him everywhere. At that moment, he was just a frightened child, and Eleanor recognized that immediately. Her voice softened. "Listen to me." Another explosion rocked the vehicle. The boy squeezed his eyes shut, terrified, certain he was going to die. Eleanor leaned closer. "You have to trust me." Something inside her voice reached him. Not confidence, not authority. Something warmer, something safer. The kind of comfort only truly kind people know how to give. Slowly, he began moving. Every inch looked painful. Glass cut his hands. His injured shoulder shook violently. The vehicle groaned again. Flames spread higher. And suddenly, Eleanor realized they were running out of time. She reached through the broken opening. "Give me your hand." The boy stared at her, then obeyed. Their hands connected. Eleanor pulled, hard. The boy cried out. For one terrifying second, she thought he was trapped. Then his body suddenly broke free. Both of them crashed backward into the freezing water. 30 seconds later, the SUV exploded. The blast illuminated the storm like daylight. Heat rolled across the ditch. The boy stared at the burning wreckage. His face turned completely white. If she had arrived 1 minute later, he would have died. Neither of them spoke. Neither needed to. Both understood exactly how close death had come. And what Eleanor didn't realize was this. The boy would remember that moment for the rest of his life, even after becoming one of the most powerful men in America. Even after building an empire, even after fear became his weapon, he would never forget the girl who pulled him from the fire. 15 years later, New York City. The storm from that long-ago night had become nothing more than a distant memory, at least for most people, but not for Adrian Moretti, and certainly not for Eleanor Pierce, although neither of them knew fate was already pulling their lives back together. At 31 years old, Eleanor's life looked nothing like the future she once imagined. Years of sacrifice had quietly stolen her dreams, one piece at a time. Her father had died when she was 20. Medical bills had consumed everything the family owned. Her younger brother, Leo, struggled to keep steady work. And her mother, Martha Pierce, was now battling a chronic illness that required constant care. For years, Eleanor had worked multiple jobs, cleaning offices, stocking grocery shelves, working overnight shifts, doing whatever was necessary to keep food on the table. She never complained, never asked for help, never expected anything from anyone. But life had a cruel habit of demanding more, especially from good people. That morning, Eleanor sat across from her landlord inside a cramped office building in Queens. Her stomach twisted into knots. She already knew what was coming. "I'm sorry, Eleanor." The landlord wouldn't even meet her eyes. "I can't keep extending the deadline." Eleanor lowered her gaze. Her soft fingers tightened around the worn folder resting on her lap. "I just need a little more time. You've already had 3 months." The words felt like another door closing. Outside the office window, people hurried through their ordinary lives. Inside, Eleanor felt hers collapsing. The landlord sighed. "By Friday, the apartment needs to be vacated." Silence filled the room. Eleanor nodded. She couldn't afford to cry. Not here. Not now. She stood and forced a smile. "Thank you for being patient." The landlord looked uncomfortable. Perhaps because Eleanor remained polite even while losing everything. Or perhaps because kindness is hardest to face when you're delivering bad news. As she walked back onto the street, cold wind brushed against her cheeks. For a moment, she simply stood there. 31 years old. overworked, overweight, nearly homeless, and responsible for keeping her family together. The city moved around her. Nobody noticed the plus-size woman standing alone on the sidewalk. Nobody saw how hard she fought every single day. Nobody knew how exhausted she truly was. But what Eleanor didn't know was this: her life was about to change forever. A vibrating sound interrupted her thoughts. Her phone. The caller ID displayed a familiar name, Samuel Bennett. She answered immediately. "Hello? Eleanor, where are you?" His voice sounded excited. She blinked. "Why?" "I found something." Something inside her chest stirred. Hope. A dangerous thing. "What kind of something?" "A job." Eleanor almost laughed. "I've been applying everywhere." "No, listen." Samuel lowered his voice dramatically. "This isn't normal." "What do you mean?" "The Moretti estate is hiring." Eleanor frowned. The name sounded familiar. Very familiar. Then realization struck. Everyone in New York knew the Moretti name. Business empire, luxury hotels, shipping companies, real estate developments, political influence, power, money, and rumors. Lots of rumors. People whispered about Adrian Moretti, the mysterious billionaire, the untouchable kingmaker, the man nobody openly challenged. Officially, he was one of America's most successful businessmen. Unofficially, the stories were far darker and far more dangerous. Samuel continued. "The pay is incredible. Why would they hire someone like me?" "Because they need staff immediately." Eleanor looked doubtful. "What happened to the previous staff?" Samuel laughed. "No idea. But you're running out of options." Unfortunately, he was right. By sunset, Eleanor had submitted her application. The next morning, she received a call. The interview lasted 12 minutes. The hiring decision took less than 3. By the end of the day, she had accepted a live-in housekeeping position at Moretti Estate. The salary was nearly triple what she currently earned. Housing was included. Medical insurance was included. For the first time in months, she could breathe. At least a little. 3 days later, Eleanor arrived at the estate and immediately felt completely out of place. The mansion wasn't a house. It was a kingdom. Massive stone walls surrounded the property. Iron gates towered overhead. Luxury vehicles lined the circular driveway. Private security stood at every entrance. Everything about the estate screamed power, the kind of power ordinary people never touched. As Eleanor climbed out of the shuttle carrying new employees, her confidence immediately shrank. Around her stood younger women, slim women, fashionable women, women who looked like they belonged inside luxury magazines. Then there was Eleanor. Her curvy figure filled her simple navy coat, her round cheeks flushed with nervousness. Her inexpensive suitcase looked embarrassingly small beside everyone else's luggage. Several women glanced at her. One whispered something. Another smirked. Eleanor pretended not to notice. Years of experience had taught her how. Unfortunately, the mansion staff noticed immediately, and not in a good way. A sharply dressed woman approached the group, tall, elegant, severe. The name badge on her jacket read, Olivia Bennett, house manager. Her eyes moved across the new hires, then stopped on Eleanor. For half a second, just half a second. But Eleanor recognized that look, the look people always gave her, the silent judgment, the instant assumption, the conclusion made before a single word was spoken. Olivia's expression hardened slightly. "You're Eleanor Pierce?" "Yes." Olivia looked her up and down, slowly, carefully, as though inspecting damaged merchandise. Then she spoke. "Interesting." The single word carried more criticism than an entire conversation, and somehow Eleanor knew. The real challenges inside Moretti Estate hadn't even started yet. The first week at Moretti Estate taught Eleanor an important lesson. Beauty opened doors, money kept them open, and people who looked like her were expected to stay invisible. Every morning began before sunrise. The mansion itself felt more like a luxury resort than a private residence. Marble hallways stretched endlessly. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. Paintings worth millions decorated the walls. Every room looked larger than Eleanor's entire former apartment. At first, she found herself admiring everything. Then, reality arrived. Pierce. Olivia Bennet's voice echoed through the hallway. Eleanor immediately turned. "Yes, ma'am?" Olivia handed her a clipboard. "The East Wing needs attention." "Of course." Olivia hesitated, then added something unnecessary. "Try not to break anything." Several nearby employees laughed. Eleanor forced a smile. She had heard worse, far worse. Still, the comment stung. Because it wasn't really about her work. It was about how she looked. People always assumed larger women were clumsy, careless, unprofessional, as if body size somehow determined character. Unfortunately, Olivia wasn't the only one making assumptions. The staff cafeteria quickly became another battlefield. Not an obvious one, a quiet one, the kind built from whispers, glances, and small humiliations. On her third day, Eleanor entered carrying a tray. Conversations immediately softened, not stopped, just softened, enough for her to notice. Two younger housekeepers sat nearby, both slim, both perfectly styled. Neither bothered lowering their voices enough. "I still don't understand why they hired her," the first woman laughed. "Maybe they needed someone strong enough to move furniture." More laughter. Eleanor kept walking. Years of experience had taught her how to pretend she hadn't heard. But pretending didn't stop the hurt. It never did. She sat alone near the window, looking down at her sandwich. Suddenly not hungry anymore. What nobody understood was how exhausting it became. Being judged before speaking, being dismissed before being known, being reduced to appearance, every single day. But Eleanor had survived worse than gossip, much worse. So she kept going. And unfortunately for her, the worst humiliation hadn't happened yet. 3 days later, the estate hosted a private luncheon. The guest list included wealthy investors, socialites, political donors, people who lived in a completely different universe. Housekeeping staff worked throughout the event. Invisible, silent, efficient. At least, that was the expectation. Eleanor spent most of the afternoon carrying trays and clearing tables. Everything went smoothly, until she encountered Vivian Ashcroft. The moment Vivian entered the ballroom, attention shifted. She was stunning, tall, elegant, perfectly dressed, the type of woman magazine covers adored, and she knew it. Everyone knew it. Vivian Ashcroft wasn't simply wealthy. She was powerful, old money powerful. And according to rumor, she had once been engaged to Adrian Moretti, although nobody knew exactly why the engagement ended, or why she still visited the estate so frequently. What people did know was this. Vivienne enjoyed being the most admired woman in every room. Then she noticed Eleanor. The contrast couldn't have been greater. Vivienne's designer gown probably cost more than Eleanor earned in 6 months. Her polished appearance stood opposite Eleanor's simple housekeeping uniform. Their worlds should never have crossed, yet somehow they did. Eleanor approached, carrying a tray of champagne glasses. Vivienne looked her over. Slowly, carefully, the same way Olivia had, only worse, much worse. Then she smiled, a beautiful smile, the kind that never reached the eyes. "You work here?" The question sounded harmless, but Eleanor recognized the tone. "Yes." Vivian tilted her head. "How surprising." Several nearby guests chuckled. Eleanor remained silent. Vivian continued. "The Moretti estate has always maintained such high standards." The insult landed exactly as intended. More laughter followed. Some people looked uncomfortable. Others looked entertained. Nobody defended Eleanor. Nobody ever did. She lowered her gaze, focused on the tray, counted the seconds until the conversation ended. But Vivienne wasn't finished. Tell me." Her voice dripped with false curiosity. "Do they provide special uniforms?" Eleanor frowned. "What do you mean?" Vivienne glanced toward Eleanor's curvy figure, then smiled again. "Oh, nothing." The surrounding guests laughed harder. This time Eleanor couldn't pretend not to understand. Heat flooded her cheeks. Embarrassment, humiliation. The familiar emotions returned, the same emotions she'd carried since childhood. For one painful moment, she wanted to disappear. And unfortunately, someone important witnessed everything. At the opposite side of the ballroom, a conversation suddenly stopped. A group of executives immediately fell silent. Several guests straightened. Security personnel subtly adjusted their posture. The atmosphere changed, not dramatically, but noticeably, because Adrian Moretti had entered the room. At 6'4", Adrian commanded attention without trying. His tailored black suit fit perfectly. Dark hair, sharp features, cold confidence. The kind of confidence built from power, real power, not social influence, not inherited wealth, power that could alter lives. The room reacted instantly, because everyone knew exactly who he was. Officially, Adrian Moretti was a billionaire businessman. Unofficially, he was something far more dangerous. The head of the Moretti empire. A man rivals feared. A man politicians respected. A man newspapers rarely criticized. A man capable of silencing an entire room simply by walking into it. Adrian exchanged greetings, accepted handshakes, acknowledged guests. Then his attention shifted toward the small gathering surrounding Vivienne, toward the laughter, toward the visibly uncomfortable housekeeper standing in the center of it all, toward Eleanor. Something about her immediately caught his attention. Not her appearance, not her uniform, something else. Something he couldn't explain. She looked embarrassed. Yet, she wasn't angry. She looked hurt. Yet, she remained polite. And somehow, that intrigued him. Vivienne noticed Adrian watching. Immediately her smile brightened. Perfect, calculated, designed for him. But Adrian wasn't looking at Vivienne. His eyes remained on Eleanor for only a few seconds. Then he turned away. The moment passed. Or at least, it should have. Because later that night, long after the guests had gone home, Adrian would unexpectedly remember the expression on Eleanor Pierce's face. And for reasons he couldn't understand, the memory refused to leave him. 3 days passed, then 5, then 7, and somehow, Adrian Moretti kept noticing Eleanor Pierce. Not because she demanded attention, quite the opposite. She seemed determined to avoid it. Every morning before sunrise, she was already working. Every night, she was among the last employees to leave. She never complained, never argued, never gossiped. And unlike many employees desperate to impress wealthy guests, Eleanor never tried to be seen. She simply did her job, quietly, consistently, professionally. Which was precisely why Adrian found her unusual. Most people wanted something from him. Money, influence, power, favors, connections. Even kindness often came with hidden expectations. But Eleanor never approached him, never attempted conversation, never tried attracting attention. In fact, she seemed slightly nervous whenever he appeared. That alone made her different. Because fear and respect were reactions Adrian understood. Manipulation was something else entirely, and Eleanor showed none of it. Still, something about her continued bothering him, not in a negative way, in a familiar way, a feeling he couldn't explain. And Adrian Moretti hated mysteries, especially ones involving people. One rainy afternoon, that mystery deepened. The mansion's library was usually empty. Most guests preferred the wine room, the theater, the indoor pool. Very few people visited a room filled with books. Adrian certainly wasn't expecting company when he stepped inside, yet someone was there. Eleanor. She sat alone at a corner table. A thick history book rested open before her. Her reading glasses sat low on her nose. A notebook filled with handwritten notes lay beside her. For several seconds, Adrian simply watched, surprised. The image didn't match what most people assumed about her, including him. Then again, most assumptions about people were wrong. Eleanor suddenly sensed someone nearby. Looking up, she nearly jumped. "Oh!" She immediately stood. "Mr. Moretti." Adrian nodded. "You can sit." Her cheeks flushed. Embarrassed. "Sorry. I didn't realize anyone else used the library." The response amused him. "I own the library." Eleanor looked horrified. "Oh, God." Adrian's mouth twitched slightly. The closest thing to a smile most people ever saw. "What are you reading?" Eleanor glanced toward the book. "American Economic History." Silence. Adrian blinked. Of all possible answers, that wasn't one he expected. "Interesting choice." Her shoulders lifted slightly. "I like learning." "And you take notes for fun?" Now Eleanor actually looked embarrassed. The genuine kind, the innocent kind. "That sounds ridiculous when you say it out loud." For the first time that day, Adrian laughed. A real laugh. Brief, quiet, unexpected. And for one strange moment, Eleanor forgot who he was. Forgot he was one of the most powerful men in New York. Forgot he controlled corporations worth billions. Forgot people whispered his name with fear. For just a second, he looked human. Then reality returned. The room grew quiet, and something unusual happened. Neither seemed eager to leave. Unfortunately, for Adrian, that conversation planted a dangerous seed. Curiosity. And curiosity was always the beginning of something larger. Over the next 2 weeks, small encounters continued. In hallways, the library, the gardens, the kitchen. Nothing dramatic, nothing romantic, just conversations. Yet Adrian found himself increasingly intrigued. One evening, he discovered Eleanor helping an elderly groundskeeper repair damaged tools. Another day, she spent her lunch break teaching a young kitchen assistant how to read financial forms. Once he even caught her secretly paying for medication belonging to another employee's child. She never told anyone. Never asked for recognition. Never expected repayment. She simply helped. Again and again. And every time Adrian witnessed it, the same question appeared. Why? Why was someone who had so little constantly giving to others? People like that were rare. Extremely rare. Especially in Adrian's world. A world built on power, negotiation, leverage, and self-interest. Yet Eleanor seemed untouched by all of it. And that terrified him more than he cared to admit, because people like Eleanor had the power to make dangerous men remember who they once were. Meanwhile, someone else had started paying attention. Vivienne Ashcroft. At first, she dismissed Eleanor entirely. A temporary employee, a forgettable housekeeper, an inconvenience. Nothing more. But then she noticed something disturbing. Adrian remembered Eleanor's name. That alone was unusual. Adrian rarely remembered employee names. Yet during one meeting, he casually asked, "Has Eleanor finished organizing the archive room?" Vivienne immediately noticed. Days later, he asked another question, then another, each one small, harmless. Yet together, they formed a pattern. And Vivienne hated patterns, especially when another woman was involved. Unfortunately for Eleanor, Vivienne's jealousy was beginning to grow, and jealous people rarely remained passive. One evening, Adrian found himself alone inside his private office. The city skyline glittered beyond the massive windows. The room itself reflected everything people expected from him: power, luxury, control. Yet his thoughts remained elsewhere, on Eleanor. Specifically, something she'd said earlier, a simple sentence, nothing important, or at least it shouldn't have been. Someone had accidentally broken an antique vase, a valuable piece. Olivia immediately began demanding punishment. Several employees agreed. The atmosphere became tense. Then Eleanor quietly spoke. People matter more than objects. That was all. Just one sentence. Yet the moment Adrian heard it, something happened. A strange sensation flashed through his mind. Rain, thunder, cold wind, a voice. A girl's voice. Soft. Warm. Safe. You have to trust me. Adrian suddenly froze. The memory vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving him staring into space. His pulse quickened. What was that? The storm. The accident. The girl. For 15 years, those memories had remained buried, fragmented, incomplete. Yet suddenly they felt closer, more real, more alive. And somehow, the feeling appeared every time he was near Eleanor Pierce. Unfortunately for Adrian, he still had no idea why. By the beginning of her second month at Moretti Estate, something had changed, not in the mansion, not among the staff, certainly not in the way people treated Eleanor. That remained largely the same. The whispers still existed. The judgmental glances still followed her. Several employees continued assuming the plus-size housekeeper was less capable simply because she didn't fit their definition of beauty. But something had changed between Eleanor and Adrian, and both of them felt it. Even if neither fully understood it, the first sign appeared during breakfast. Not Adrian's breakfast, the staff breakfast, a place where Eleanor usually sat alone. That morning, she quietly read a newspaper while drinking coffee. Several employees occupied nearby tables. Nobody spoke to her. Nobody invited her over. Eleanor had long since accepted that reality. Then a familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. "What do you think?" The cafeteria instantly fell silent. Forks stopped moving. Conversations died. Several employees nearly dropped their coffee cups because Adrian Moretti had just entered the room, and he was speaking directly to Eleanor. Her eyes widened. "I'm sorry?" Adrian placed a newspaper on the table. The front page featured an article discussing a proposed housing initiative. "What do you think about it?" Every employee stared openly now. Adrian ignored them. Eleanor wished she could disappear. "Why are you asking me?" His expression remained calm. "Because you always have an opinion." That answer surprised her. It surprised everyone, including Adrian, because it was true. Over the previous weeks, he had noticed something unusual. Whenever Eleanor discussed a topic, she actually thought about it. Most people repeated opinions. Eleanor formed them. There was a difference, a significant one. After a brief hesitation, she answered, and for the next 10 minutes, they discussed economics, housing policy, and working-class communities. Not once did Adrian interrupt. Not once did he dismiss her perspective. The conversation flowed naturally, effortlessly, until finally he stood. "Interesting." Eleanor blinked. "What is?" "You." Then Adrian walked away, leaving behind complete silence, and one very confused housekeeper. Unfortunately, someone else had witnessed everything. Vivian, standing in the doorway, watching. The jealousy growing inside her chest became impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, Eleanor struggled with a different problem. The more time she spent around Adrian, the harder it became to reconcile the two versions of him. There was the public Adrian, the feared billionaire, the powerful Moretti heir, the man surrounded by bodyguards, the man everyone respected or feared. Then there was the private Adrian, the one who asked thoughtful questions, the one who listened, the one who remembered details, the one who occasionally looked lonely. And that version confused her, because it felt real. One evening she discovered him alone in the greenhouse. The enormous glass structure sat behind the mansion. Most people never visited, which was exactly why Adrian liked it. Eleanor entered carrying gardening supplies, then froze. Adrian stood among rows of orchids. His suit jacket rested nearby. For once there were no bodyguards, no assistants, no executives, just him. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Adrian looked up. "You don't have to leave." Eleanor hesitated. I don't want to interrupt. You aren't. Something about his tone convinced her. She moved farther inside. The greenhouse felt strangely peaceful. Warm, quiet, safe. A complete contrast to Adrian's reputation. After several minutes, Eleanor finally asked a question. Why do you like this place? Adrian looked around. The answer came immediately. No one expects anything from me here. The words lingered, unexpectedly vulnerable. Eleanor studied him carefully. For the first time, she saw genuine exhaustion. Not physical exhaustion, emotional exhaustion. The kind, powerful people rarely admitted. Then she smiled softly. I understand that. Nah. Adrian looked surprised. You do? She nodded. People make assumptions about me before I even speak. His expression darkened slightly, because he knew exactly what she meant. The comments, the whispers, the ridicule. He had seen enough. Eleanor continued. They think they know who I am. Her smile faded. But they only see my body. The confession came quietly, almost reluctantly. Years of pain hidden behind simple words. Adrian stared at her. At the woman everyone overlooked. The woman others mocked. The woman who somehow possessed more dignity than most of the wealthy people he knew. And suddenly something inside him shifted. Not attraction, not yet. Something deeper. Respect. Real respect. The kind that couldn't be bought, couldn't be demanded, couldn't be forced. It had to be earned, and Eleanor had earned it. What neither of them realized was that respect was often the first step towards something much more dangerous. Later that night, Eleanor returned to her room. Her phone immediately rang. Mama? Martha Pierce's voice sounded weak, tired. Eleanor, sweetheart. Instantly, her stomach tightened. What's wrong? The answer shattered her evening. The medication, the insurance, the treatment costs, everything had become more expensive. Again. By the time the call ended, Eleanor sat alone on her bed fighting tears, no matter how hard she worked. The struggle never seemed to end, and for the first time since arriving at Moretti Estate, she felt completely overwhelmed. What Eleanor didn't know was that someone had seen her leave the greenhouse earlier, someone who now viewed her as a threat. Vivienne Ashcroft, the former fiancée, the woman who believed Adrian belonged to her. And Vivienne had finally reached a conclusion. Eleanor Pierce needed to disappear before Adrian's growing interest became something impossible to control. Unfortunately for Eleanor, Vivienne's first attack was already being planned. Vivienne Ashcroft had spent most of her life getting exactly what she wanted. Beauty opened doors. Money removed obstacles. Influence silenced opposition. And for years, she had fully expected Adrian Moretti to become her husband. The engagement might have ended. But in Vivienne's mind, the story wasn't over. It had merely been delayed. Then Eleanor Pierce appeared, and suddenly everything felt different. At first, Vivienne ignored her. Then she mocked her. Now she viewed her as a threat. And Vivienne never tolerated threats. 3 days later, she made her first move. The opportunity arrived during preparations for an important private dinner. Several politicians, corporate executives, foreign investors. The type of guests Adrian carefully selected. Every detail needed to be perfect. Vivienne personally volunteered to assist with event planning. Officially, she was helping. Unofficially, she was hunting. And Eleanor had become the target. The trap itself was simple. Simple traps were usually the most effective. That afternoon, Olivia Bennet summoned Eleanor. The East Ballroom needs final inspection. Eleanor nodded. Of course. When she arrived, several expensive pieces of jewelry sat displayed inside a velvet presentation case. Necklaces, bracelets, diamond earrings, collectively worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Eleanor immediately felt uncomfortable. Why are these here? One employee shrugged. They're being auctioned tonight. Eleanor carefully continued cleaning, never touching the jewelry, never approaching the display. exactly as instructed. Unfortunately, someone else had different plans. Several hours later, chaos erupted. The ballroom suddenly filled with voices, security personnel, managers, staff members, everyone speaking at once. Eleanor entered carrying fresh linens. Immediately sensing something was wrong, Olivia stood near the display case, furious. The necklace is missing. The room froze. Eleanor frowned. What necklace? Nobody answered. Several employees exchanged glances. Others looked directly at Eleanor, and suddenly she understood. Her stomach dropped. No, no, no. Vivian slowly stepped forward. The concern on her face looked convincing. Almost. I hate to say this. Eleanor already knew what came next. But she was alone in the ballroom earlier. Silence. The accusation hung in the air, heavy, ugly, cruel. Several employees immediately looked suspicious. Others appeared uncomfortable, but nobody defended her. Because accusations are powerful, especially when aimed at someone already judged. Olivia crossed her arms. Search her room. D. Eleanor stared in disbelief. You think I stole it? Vivian sighed dramatically. Nobody wants to believe that. The statement felt like poison wrapped in silk. Security personnel exchanged uncertain looks, then followed orders. 20 minutes later, they returned, and everything became worse, because they found the necklace inside Eleanor's room, hidden beneath her mattress. The room exploded with whispers, gasps, shock. Eleanor simply stared, unable to process what she was seeing. Her mind refused to accept reality, because she knew exactly one thing. She had never touched that necklace. Never. Not once. Yet, there it was. The evidence. Perfect. Undeniable. Manufactured. And devastating. Unfortunately for Eleanor, evidence often mattered more than truth. Olivia's disappointment looked genuine. I expected better. Eleanor's voice shook. I didn't do this. Nobody responded. I swear. Still nothing. The humiliation felt unbearable. Years of judgment. Years of assumptions. Years of people believing the worst. All crashing down at once. Because this time, everyone seemed to have proof. Then another voice spoke. Cold. Controlled. Dangerous. What exactly is happening? The room instantly fell silent. Every single person turned. Adrian Moretti stood in the doorway. The atmosphere changed immediately. Fear, respect, tension. The emotional temperature dropped 10 degrees. Because when Adrian entered a room, people paid attention. Not because he demanded it, because power spoke for itself. His dark eyes moved across the gathering. The security team, Olivia, Vivian, then finally Eleanor. What he saw disturbed him. Her cheeks were flushed. Her eyes glistened. Her hands trembled, not with guilt, with hurt. And somehow Adrian recognized the difference. Olivia quickly explained. The necklace, the search, the discovery, the evidence, everything. Adrian listened without interruption. His expression revealed nothing. When Olivia finished, silence followed. Then Adrian asked a simple question. Did anyone actually see Eleanor take it? Nobody answered. Vivian stepped forward. The necklace was found in her room. I asked a different question. But his voice remained calm, which somehow made it more intimidating. Vivian hesitated. No. Adrian nodded slowly, then looked toward Eleanor. Did you take it? Their eyes met. For one brief moment, the rest of the room disappeared. Eleanor swallowed hard. Humiliation burned inside her chest. But something else existed too. Determination. No. One word. Simple. Certain. Honest. Adrian held her gaze and believed her immediately. Without explanation, without evidence, without logic, he simply believed her. The realization surprised even him, because Adrian trusted almost nobody. Yet somehow, he trusted Eleanor. Unfortunately, proving innocence was another matter entirely. And Vivienne wasn't finished, not even close. Because while everyone focused on the necklace, she was already preparing a second attack, one far more damaging than the first. And this time, even Adrian might not be able to protect Eleanor. For the next few days, Eleanor lived beneath a cloud of suspicion. Officially, Adrian had ordered the investigation to remain open. Officially, nobody had been found guilty. Officially, Eleanor still had her job. But reality was very different. Rumors spread faster than facts, especially when the target was someone people already wanted to believe the worst about. Every hallway conversation stopped when Eleanor approached. Every cafeteria whisper seemed connected to her. Every glance carried judgment. Some employees pretended sympathy. Others didn't bother hiding their opinions. Maybe she got greedy. I always thought something felt off. People can surprise you. The comments followed her everywhere, and each one hurt, not because strangers doubted her, but because she had spent her entire life trying to be good, trying to help others, trying to do the right thing, yet somehow that never seemed to matter. One mistake, one accusation, one lie, and suddenly years of honesty meant nothing. Unfortunately, Vivienne wasn't satisfied. The necklace incident had damaged Eleanor, but it hadn't destroyed her. And Vivienne wanted destruction, complete destruction. The opportunity arrived 2 weeks later. The Moretti Foundation announced a major charity fundraiser. Hundreds of guests would attend. Politicians, celebrities, business leaders, media personalities. The event would be covered across New York. Everyone inside the estate immediately entered preparation mode, including Eleanor. For 3 days she barely slept. Tables, decorations, guest accommodations, inventory. The workload seemed endless. Meanwhile, Vivienne quietly prepared her next move. This time she wasn't acting alone. She had help. Gerald Ashcroft, her father. Unlike Vivienne, Gerald didn't care about jealousy. He cared about power. And recently he had noticed something troubling. Adrian Moretti was becoming increasingly difficult to influence. For years, the Ashcroft family had expected a marriage alliance. That alliance would create enormous financial benefits, political advantages, business opportunities, control. Now Eleanor threatened everything, which meant Eleanor had to go permanently. The night of the fundraiser finally arrived. The estate transformed into something extraordinary. Crystal lights illuminated the gardens. Luxury vehicles filled the driveway. Music drifted through the evening air. Guests arrived wearing designer clothing worth more than most annual salaries. And among them walked Eleanor Pierce, invisible, as usual. Her housekeeping uniform remained simple, professional, unremarkable. She spent hours ensuring everything ran smoothly, and for a while it did. Then disaster struck, or at least it appeared to. Shortly after 8 o'clock, an expensive bracelet vanished. Again, the timing felt almost impossible, too perfect, too familiar. Yet within minutes, whispers began. Then accusations, then panic. Several guests openly demanded answers. The atmosphere shifted rapidly, and somehow, Eleanor once again found herself standing at the center of the storm, this time in front of hundreds of people. Her stomach sank. No, not again. Please, not again. Vivienne approached, looking appropriately concerned. Surely this can't be happening twice. The words sounded innocent. They weren't. Several guests immediately turned toward Eleanor. Recognition appeared. The previous accusation. The necklace. The rumors. Everything resurfaced. One woman laughed quietly. Another shook her head. A businessman muttered something about predictable outcomes. Eleanor felt every word, every stare, every assumption, because unlike wealthy guests protected by status and influence, she had nothing, no power, no reputation, no voice, just herself. And suddenly that felt very small. very vulnerable. Then someone stepped forward, a socialite Eleanor had never met. The woman smiled cruelly. "You know," her eyes moved deliberately over Eleanor's curvy frame. "I suppose greed isn't surprising." Laughter followed. Eleanor lowered her gaze. The humiliation burned, but the woman wasn't finished. Perhaps she thought nobody would notice. More laughter. A second guest joined in. Or perhaps she wanted to buy a larger wardrobe. The room erupted. Some people laughed openly now. Others looked uncomfortable. But nobody stopped it. Nobody. And for the first time since arriving at Moretti Estate, Eleanor felt something breaking inside her. Not anger, not embarrassment. Something deeper. Hope. The hope that people would eventually see her differently. The hope that hard work would matter. The hope that kindness would be enough. Years of judgment suddenly felt unbearable, because no matter what she did, the outcome always seemed the same. The plus-size woman became the joke. The target, the easy victim. Her eyes filled with tears, and she hated herself for it, because crying meant they won. Yet she couldn't stop it. Meanwhile, across the ballroom, Adrian Moretti watched everything. Every word, every laugh, every expression. And something dark began growing inside him. Very dark. Most people misunderstood Adrian. They assumed power made him cold, cruel, detached. Sometimes it did, but power also gave him something else. The ability to recognize predators. And tonight he saw them everywhere. The socialites, the opportunists, the people attacking someone weaker simply because they could. The sight disgusted him, especially because Eleanor wasn't fighting back. She simply stood there, trying desperately to maintain dignity while being torn apart. And somehow, that hurt more. Then came the final blow. Gerald Ashcroft stepped forward. The room immediately quieted. His reputation carried weight, influence, authority. He looked toward Eleanor, then slowly shook his head. "Some people don't belong in places like this." The sentence landed like a knife, because everyone understood what he meant. Everyone. The room fell silent. Eleanor stared at the floor. Humiliation flooded every part of her. At that moment, she wanted only one thing: to leave. To disappear, to escape. And for the first time since accepting the job, she seriously considered walking away forever. Unfortunately for the people attacking her, they had pushed things too far, much too far, because across the ballroom, Adrian Moretti finally started moving, and anyone familiar with Adrian understood exactly what that meant. Something was about to happen, something nobody in that room would ever forget. The ballroom fell silent, not gradually, instantly, because Adrian Moretti was walking toward Eleanor. And when Adrian Moretti moved with purpose, people paid attention. Every conversation died. Every laugh disappeared. Even the musicians seemed quieter. The atmosphere shifted beneath an invisible weight. Power. Real power. The kind that didn't need to announce itself. Eleanor stood frozen. Her eyes still glistened with unshed tears. Her hands trembled slightly at her sides. She hated that everyone could see it. Hated feeling vulnerable. Hated being the center of attention. Most of all, she hated that Adrian was witnessing this. Because somehow his opinion mattered more than she wanted to admit. Meanwhile, Adrian continued walking. Slowly, calmly, dangerously. The crowd parted without being asked. Guests stepped aside. 1. Executives lowered their eyes. Security personnel straightened instinctively. Nobody wanted to stand in his path, not when he looked like this. Vivian immediately sensed trouble. So did Gerald. Unfortunately for them, it was already too late. Adrian stopped beside Eleanor. Not in front of her, not behind her, beside her. The distinction mattered. Everyone noticed, including Eleanor. For the first time all evening, she looked up. Their eyes met. Nay, 10. Nay. And something inside her chest tightened. because Adrian wasn't looking at her with suspicion, or pity, or embarrassment. He looked angry, not at her, for her. The realization stunned her. Then Adrian turned toward the crowd. His expression hardened. What exactly is happening here? Nobody answered. Nobody wanted to. The silence stretched, uncomfortable, heavy. Finally, Gerald Ashcroft spoke. We're simply discussing a security concern. Adrian's gaze shifted toward him. Cold, unblinking. A security concern. The repetition sounded less like a question and more like a warning. Gerald straightened, clearly irritated. The same employee has now been connected to 2 incidents. Several guests nodded, encouraged, feeling safer now that someone powerful had spoken first. Big mistake. Adrian remained silent for several seconds. Then he asked, "Connected how?" Gerald frowned. The bracelet disappeared. That wasn't my question. The older man's expression darkened. Adrian took another step forward. The room grew even quieter. Has anyone seen Eleanor steal anything? Silence. No. N. Has anyone produced evidence? More silence. No. Has anyone proven anything whatsoever? Nobody answered. Because nobody could. The entire accusation rested on assumptions, rumors, convenient timing. Nothing more. Adrian nodded slowly. Then his gaze swept across the room, one by one, guest by guest. The effect was immediate. People suddenly found the floor fascinating. Others looked away. Nobody wanted his attention. Not now. Not like this. Then Adrian spoke, and every word landed like a hammer. So let me understand. His voice remained calm, controlled, which somehow made it worse. A room full of educated adults decided to publicly humiliate a woman based on gossip. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. A woman who has spent the last 2 months working harder than most people in this room. Several guests looked uncomfortable. Adrian wasn't finished. A woman who has shown more integrity than many individuals currently criticizing her. Now people were avoiding eye contact entirely. The embarrassment had shifted. Suddenly Eleanor wasn't the one being judged anymore. They were, and everyone knew it. What happened next shocked the entire ballroom, including Eleanor. Adrian turned toward her, then offered his arm. Not dramatically, not romantically, simply naturally, as though the decision required no thought. Walk with me. The room collectively froze. Eleanor stared, certain she had misheard. What? Walk with me. Her heart pounded. This couldn't be happening. Not here, not in front of everyone. Yet Adrian remained waiting. Patient, certain. Slowly, Eleanor accepted. The moment her hand rested lightly against his arm, the entire room changed. Because symbols matter, and this symbol was impossible to ignore. The most powerful man in the building had chosen a side. Publicly, unmistakably. And that side was Eleanor Pierce, the plus-size housekeeper everyone had spent the evening mocking. Vivian's face lost color. Gerald looked furious. The guests appeared stunned. But Adrian didn't care, not even slightly. He guided Eleanor toward the center of the ballroom, then did something nobody expected. He picked up a microphone. A dangerous silence followed. Adrian rarely made speeches. When he did, people listened. I have a request. The room became completely still. If anyone here possesses evidence against Eleanor Pierce, he paused, looking directly at the crowd. I invite you to present it right now. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Nobody could, because there was no evidence, only cruelty. And Adrian knew it. Several agonizing seconds passed. Then Adrian nodded. That's what I thought. The humiliation reversed instantly. Now the people who had laughed looked foolish, small, petty, exactly as they should. Eleanor stood beside him, completely speechless. Her pulse thundered. She couldn't remember the last time someone defended her, really defended her. without hesitation, without conditions, without asking for anything in return. The feeling was almost overwhelming, and for a brief moment, dangerously brief, she felt safe. Unfortunately for Eleanor, that feeling created a new problem, because safety around Adrian Moretti was becoming addictive. Later that evening, the fundraiser resumed. The crowd recovered. Conversations restarted. Music returned. But something fundamental had changed. People now looked at Eleanor differently. Not with respect, not yet, but with caution. Because everyone understood one thing. Adrian Moretti cared what happened to her. And that made Eleanor untouchable, at least temporarily. Meanwhile, Adrian stood alone on a balcony overlooking the estate. The city lights shimmered in the distance. Normally, moments like this helped him think. Tonight, they only confused him, because he couldn't stop replaying Eleanor's expression. The relief, the gratitude, the vulnerability, and underneath it all, something familiar, a feeling he couldn't explain. Then suddenly another memory flashed. Rain, darkness, a teenage girl's voice, warm hands pulling him from wreckage. "You have to trust me." Adrian froze. The memory vanished immediately, leaving only frustration behind. For 15 years he'd searched for the girl who saved his life. For 15 years he'd found nothing. No name, no face, no answers. Yet recently those memories kept returning. Again and again, and somehow, always around Eleanor. What Adrian didn't realize was that he had just taken the first real step toward discovering the truth. And once that truth emerged, nothing in either of their lives would ever be the same again. For the first time in years, Adrian Moretti became distracted. Not by business, not by rivals, not by politics, by a memory. A memory he could barely remember, and a woman he couldn't stop thinking about. 3 days after the fundraiser, Adrian cancelled 2 meetings. That alone shocked his executive team. The head of the Moretti empire rarely cancelled anything. Yet that morning he sat alone inside his private study staring at a weathered cardboard box. A box he hadn't opened in years. Inside rested fragments of a forgotten past. Newspaper clippings, medical reports, old photographs, and one item he had never managed to throw away. A faded blue jacket, the jacket. The one she had wrapped around his shoulders 15 years earlier. The fabric looked worn now. Time had faded its color. But Adrian remembered everything, or at least, he remembered pieces. Rain, cold, fear, a girl's voice, and kindness. A level of kindness he had never encountered before or since. Slowly he lifted the jacket. Something fell onto the desk, a small object. Adrian frowned. He didn't remember seeing it before. Reaching down, he picked it up. A metal pin, simple, inexpensive, heart-shaped. The back had partially rusted, but the engraving remained visible. P. L. Adrian stared. His pulse quickened. What did it mean? The answer refused to come. Yet, somehow, it felt important. Very important. Meanwhile, across the estate, Eleanor was experiencing problems of her own. Her mother's condition had worsened. The latest medical report wasn't good. Treatment costs continued increasing. And despite the improved salary, Eleanor still struggled to keep everything together. That afternoon, she sat alone in the staff courtyard, staring at her phone, worried, exhausted, scared. She didn't hear approaching footsteps. Eleanor. She looked up, immediately standing. Mr. Moretti. Adrian studied her face. The concern, the fatigue, the sadness she was trying so hard to hide. Something tightened inside his chest. "You look tired." The statement was simple, yet unexpectedly caring. Eleanor forced a smile. "I'm okay." Adrian almost laughed. She was a terrible liar. Unfortunately, she was also stubborn. "I received a call from the insurance coordinator." Eleanor froze, instantly. completely. Fear flashed across her face. Adrian noticed. "You submitted a request for additional medical coverage." Her eyes widened. "My mother." The explanation died halfway through. Embarrassment flooded her cheeks. She hated discussing personal struggles, especially with someone like Adrian, someone powerful, someone important, someone who could never truly understand. At least that's what she believed. To her surprise, Adrian sat down beside her, not across from her, beside her, again. The gesture felt strangely familiar, comforting, dangerously comforting. "Tell me about her." Eleanor hesitated, then slowly began speaking. About Martha, about hospital visits, about medications, about fear, about responsibility, about watching someone you love suffer while feeling helpless. Adrian listened quietly, interrupting only occasionally. As the conversation continued, something unexpected happened. Eleanor relaxed, really relaxed, perhaps for the first time since arriving at the estate. And Adrian noticed details, small details. The way her eyes softened when discussing her mother. The way she smiled while describing childhood memories. The way she always focused on other people before herself. Every observation deepened his respect. Every conversation increased his curiosity. And every moment spent together strengthened a connection neither fully understood. Then something strange happened. Very strange. As Eleanor described an old community center from her teenage years, Adrian suddenly froze. "What was the name?" She blinked. "The community center?" "Yes. Pierce Point Learning Center." Silence. A strange expression crossed Adrian's face, because suddenly he remembered the initials. PL. The initials engraved on the heart-shaped pin. The same pin discovered inside the old jacket. His pulse accelerated. Impossible. Surely coincidence. Yet the feeling remained. Strong. Persistent. Uncomfortable. Unfortunately for Adrian, the clues were beginning to connect, and he wasn't prepared for where they led. That evening he retrieved the pin again, examining it under brighter light. This time, he noticed something else. Tiny letters etched into the back. Almost invisible, almost erased by time, but still readable. Property of Eleanor P. Adrian stopped breathing. For several seconds he simply stared. The room felt smaller, the silence heavier. Eleanor P. Eleanor. No. Impossible. His mind immediately rejected the idea. There had to be thousands of Eleanors. Thousands. Yet the coincidence felt too specific, too precise, too deliberate. Suddenly another memory surfaced. Not the storm. Something after. A paramedic speaking. The rescued girl. A volunteer. Someone from a community center. Someone named. His thoughts fractured. The memory disappeared again, leaving frustration behind. Yet now, Adrian couldn't ignore the possibility. For the first time in 15 years, he might actually be close. Very close. Meanwhile, someone else was uncovering information. Vivienne. And unlike Adrian, she moved quickly, ruthlessly. Her private investigator had spent weeks examining Eleanor's background. At first, the information seemed harmless. Family records, employment history, medical debts. Nothing unusual. Then, a discovery emerged. One old newspaper article, 15 years old, forgotten, buried. The article described a storm, a highway accident, a teenage girl who helped rescue a boy. Vivienne stared at the article, then stared at Eleanor's photograph, then smiled, a slow smile, a dangerous smile, because suddenly everything made sense. The growing connection, Adrian's interest, the strange familiarity, the memories, and worst of all, the truth. Vivienne now understood something Adrian didn't. Eleanor wasn't just another employee. She was the girl, the one he'd spent 15 years searching for, the one who had saved his life. And if Adrian discovered that truth, Vivienne would lose him forever, which meant there was only one solution. The truth could never be allowed to reach Adrian. no matter what it cost. The truth was finally within reach, closer than it had ever been in 15 years, and that terrified Vivian Ashcroft. For weeks, she had watched Adrian change. The transformation was subtle, almost invisible to outsiders, but not to her. She noticed the way his attention followed Eleanor, the way his voice softened around her, the way he defended her without hesitation. Most importantly, she noticed something Adrian himself had not yet fully realized. He was falling in love, not with Eleanor's appearance, not with fantasy, not with attraction. He was falling in love with who she was. And once he discovered she was also the girl who had saved his life, everything would be over. Vivian knew it, which meant she had one final chance: destroy the connection before the truth emerged. 3 days later, the opportunity arrived. Adrian had spent nearly every waking hour investigating. The old accident, the community center, the jacket, the heart-shaped pin. Everything pointed toward Eleanor. Yet he needed certainty, not assumptions, not coincidences. Proof, real proof. That morning he contacted the retired paramedic who had responded to the accident 15 years earlier. The man still lived in New York, still remembered the case, and surprisingly, still possessed records. When Adrian received the message confirming a meeting, his pulse quickened. This was it. The answer, after 15 years, finally, unfortunately. Vivian learned about the meeting before he arrived and immediately took action. Because desperate people often become dangerous. The retired paramedic never met Adrian. His car broke down unexpectedly. His phone disappeared. The meeting was cancelled. Every coincidence carefully engineered. Every detail planned. And Adrian had no idea. Meanwhile, Vivienne prepared a second strike, this time directly against Eleanor. The attack came disguised as kindness, which made it far more effective. That afternoon, Vivian approached Eleanor privately. No insults, no mockery, no audience, just concern, or at least the appearance of concern. "Eleanor, may we talk?" Eleanor looked surprised, but nodded politely. The two women sat inside a quiet lounge near the estate gardens. For several moments, Vivian said nothing. Then she sighed, a perfectly rehearsed sigh. "I think you deserve honesty." Immediately, Eleanor became uncomfortable. Something felt wrong, very wrong. Vivian leaned forward. "Do you know why Adrian keeps spending time with you?" The question caught Eleanor off guard. She hesitated. "No," Vivian smiled sadly, almost sympathetically. "Because you remind him of someone." The words landed softly. Yet something about them hurt. Eleanor couldn't explain why. Vivian continued. "Someone he loved. A lie. A complete lie. But effective." "He told you that?" "Not directly." "Another lie. But everyone close to Adrian knows." Eleanor's stomach tightened. Vivienne lowered her voice. "There was a woman years ago." A pause, carefully timed. Someone he never forgot. The attack had begun. And Eleanor didn't even realize it. "He isn't interested in you, Eleanor." The words came gently, cruelly gentle. "You're simply reminding him of someone else." Every sentence struck deeper. Every word planted doubt. Every lie felt believable, because it targeted Eleanor's greatest insecurity. Why would a man like Adrian choose someone like her? Why would someone powerful notice a plus-size housekeeper? Why would someone admired by countless women care about Eleanor Pierce? The questions already existed inside her. Vivian simply gave them a voice, and that made them dangerous. By the time the conversation ended, Eleanor felt emotionally exhausted, confused, heartbroken. For the first time, she began questioning everything: the conversations, the smiles, the concern, the connection. Maybe Vivian was right. Maybe she had imagined all of it. Unfortunately, the worst part came later. That evening, Eleanor accidentally overheard part of a conversation. Not the entire conversation, only enough to misunderstand. Adrian stood inside his office, speaking with Samuel Bennett. "The girl from the accident." Adrian's voice sounded distant, thoughtful. "I've searched for her my entire life." Eleanor stopped walking, frozen. Her chest tightened. The girl from the accident? Someone he never forgot? Someone he'd searched for his entire life? Vivian's words immediately resurfaced. A woman from the past. Someone special. Someone unforgettable. Eleanor listened, unable to move, unable to breathe. "I need to find her," Adrian continued. "I need her to know she changed everything." The sentence shattered what remained of Eleanor's defenses. She quietly stepped away before hearing the rest. Before hearing the truth. Before learning that the girl Adrian described was actually her, and that mistake changed everything. That night, Eleanor sat alone inside her room. Tears rolled silently down her cheeks. Not dramatic tears, not loud tears. The quiet kind, the painful kind, the kind people cry when nobody is watching. For months, she had allowed herself hope. Hope that Adrian genuinely cared. Hope that he saw something worthwhile in her. Hope that she mattered. Now all of it felt foolish, embarrassing, naive. Because how could she possibly compete with a memory? How could she compete with the woman Adrian had spent 15 years searching for? The answer was simple. She couldn't, and perhaps she never had. Meanwhile, Adrian sat alone inside his office reviewing accident records, completely unaware of the damage already done, completely unaware that Eleanor was packing her belongings, completely unaware that she had decided to leave. By midnight, the decision was final. She would finish the week, then disappear, just as she always did. Quietly, without causing trouble, without asking anyone to stay. And for the first time since arriving at Moretti Estate, Eleanor felt completely broken. Unfortunately for both of them, the truth was now closer than ever, yet somehow farther away than before. The annual Moretti Foundation Gala was supposed to be a celebration. Instead, it became a battlefield. By the following Saturday evening, the Moretti Estate looked more magnificent than ever. Thousands of lights illuminated the grounds. Luxury cars stretched down the private entrance road. Politicians, media executives, celebrities, corporate leaders. Every influential name in New York seemed present. And standing at the center of it all was Adrian Moretti, tall, composed, powerful, the undisputed king of the evening. Yet despite the glamorous surroundings, his attention remained elsewhere. On Eleanor. For 3 days she had been avoiding him. 3 days. No conversations. No library visits. No accidental meetings in the greenhouse. Nothing. At first Adrian assumed she was busy. Then he noticed something else. Whenever he entered a room, Eleanor quietly left. Whenever he approached, she created distance. Whenever their eyes met, she looked away. Something was wrong. Very wrong. And Adrian hated not knowing why. Unfortunately, he was about to receive a far bigger shock. Meanwhile, upstairs in her room, Eleanor folded the last of her clothes into a suitcase. The sight made her chest ache. 2 months ago, arriving at Moretti Estate had felt like a miracle. Now leaving felt like a defeat. Yet she couldn't stay. Not anymore. Every day around Adrian hurt. Every conversation reminded her of things she could never have. Every smile created hope she could no longer afford. Vivian had been right. Adrian belonged to another world. A world Eleanor would never truly enter. And somewhere out there was the woman he had spent 15 years searching for. The woman he loved. The woman who mattered. Not her. Never her. A knock interrupted her thoughts. One sign. Olivia Bennett entered. Eleanor. She looked surprised by the suitcase. "You're leaving?" Eleanor forced a smile. After tonight, for several seconds, Olivia simply stared. Then something unexpected happened. The stern manager sighed. "You know." She hesitated. I misjudged you. Eleanor blinked. What? Olivia looked uncomfortable, almost embarrassed. I thought you wouldn't last here. A sad smile appeared. Most people did. Most people were wrong. Ah, the words stunned Eleanor, because they sounded genuine. For the first time, Olivia wasn't speaking as a manager. She was speaking as a person. You've worked harder than anyone. Another pause. And, for what it's worth, Olivia looked away briefly. I don't believe you stole anything. Emotion tightened Eleanor's throat. She hadn't expected kindness, especially not today, especially not from Olivia. But before either woman could continue, a voice echoed from the hallway. Urgent, panicked. Mr. Moretti needs everyone downstairs immediately. The gala had begun. Neither woman realized history was about to change. Downstairs, Adrian stood near the grand ballroom entrance when Samuel Bennett approached carrying a folder. His expression looked unusual, excited, confused, disbelieving. Adrian, what is it? Samuel handed him several documents. The moment Adrian opened them, everything else disappeared. His heartbeat accelerated. His breathing stopped. The room seemed to vanish, because inside the folder sat a copy of the original accident report, and attached to it, a photograph. Old, damaged, blurry, yet unmistakable. The image showed emergency responders at the crash scene. A teenage girl stood near the edge of the frame, curvy, rain-soaked, wrapped in oversized clothing, and beside the photograph was a witness statement. The name at the bottom read, Eleanor Pierce. For several seconds, Adrian couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't breathe. 15 years. 15 years of searching. 15 years of questions. 15 years of wondering whether he would ever find her. And suddenly, there she was, the girl from the storm, the girl from the wreckage, the girl who had saved his life, Eleanor. A flood of memories crashed through him. Rain, fire, fear. The oversized jacket. The warm voice. You have to trust me. The realization hit with overwhelming force. Eleanor. It had always been Eleanor. At that exact moment, another voice interrupted. Vivian. Unfortunately, she had arrived too late, because the truth was already in Adrian's hands. Still, she made one final attempt. Adrian, listen to me. He turned. And for the first time since knowing him, Vivian felt afraid. Truly afraid. Because Adrian's expression was terrifying. Not angry. Worse. Disappointed. Cold. Final. What did you do? The question sounded deadly calm. Vivian immediately knew. He knew everything, or enough. Her silence became an answer. Gerald appeared moments later, trying to intervene. Trying to explain. Trying to control the situation. Huge mistake. Adrian's gaze shifted toward him. The room temperature seemed to drop. You knew. Not a question. A statement. Gerald hesitated, and that hesitation sealed his fate. Unfortunately for the Ashcrofts, the investigation into the missing jewelry had finally produced results. Security footage, witness statements, financial transfers, everything. Samuel had spent weeks collecting evidence, waiting, building a case. Now the truth emerged all at once. The stolen necklace, the missing bracelet, the planted evidence, the lies, the manipulation. Every accusation against Eleanor had been manufactured. Every humiliation carefully orchestrated. The ballroom erupted. Guests whispered. Gasps spread. Shock rippled through the crowd. Vivian's social reputation shattered in real time. Gerald's business allies quietly stepped away. Nobody wanted to be associated with scandal, especially not scandal involving Adrian Moretti. Yet Adrian barely noticed, because his attention remained fixed on one thing, one person, Eleanor. Where was she? The answer arrived moments later. "Sir," a staff member approached. "Miss Pierce is leaving." Adrian's heart nearly stopped. "What?" She packed her belongings. No. After 15 years, after finally finding her, he couldn't lose her now. Without another word, Adrian moved. The crowd parted instantly. People called after him. Nobody received a response. Because for the first time in many years, Adrian Moretti was running. Not toward power, not toward money, not toward business, toward the woman who had saved his life, and toward a truth neither of them could escape any longer. Outside, Eleanor stepped toward the front gates carrying her suitcase. The cool night air brushed against her face. A strange mixture of sadness and relief filled her chest. This chapter was over. Maybe it was always meant to end this way. Then she heard a voice behind her. "Eleanor. Eleanor." She froze, slowly turning. Adrian stood several yards away, breathing heavily, holding something in his hand, the faded blue jacket, and suddenly Eleanor's entire world stopped moving. For several seconds, neither of them moved, neither spoke, neither breathed. The night seemed to hold itself still. Eleanor's eyes locked onto the faded blue jacket hanging from Adrian's hand, a jacket she hadn't seen in 15 years, a jacket she had assumed was lost forever, a jacket she had given away without hesitation, back when she was just a frightened 16-year-old girl trying to save a stranger's life. Her pulse hammered inside her chest. No, it couldn't be. Yet, somehow, she already knew. Adrian took a slow step forward, then another. His voice was barely above a whisper. "I found you." The words shattered something inside Eleanor. Every emotion she had buried, every memory she had forgotten, every wound she had hidden, all of it surged back at once. The storm, the crash, the terrified boy, the freezing rain, the burning vehicle, everything. Tears immediately filled her eyes, and suddenly Adrian understood. The expression, the silence, the pain. She remembered too. Oh my God. The words escaped him before he could stop them. His voice broke, actually broke, a sight almost nobody had ever witnessed, because powerful men rarely allowed themselves vulnerability, especially men like Adrian Moretti. Yet none of that mattered now. Not the empire, not the money, not the reputation, not the fear. Because standing before him was the person who had changed his entire life, the person he had searched for across 15 years, the person he never stopped remembering. And somehow, the woman he had fallen in love with, without realizing she was the same person. Adrian lifted the jacket slightly. "I kept it." A tear rolled down Eleanor's cheek. "You still have it." "I couldn't throw it away." His voice sounded rough, emotional, human. "I tried." A sad laugh escaped him. "Several times." Another step forward. "I never could." The distance between them shrank. Neither noticed, neither cared. "I searched for you." Eleanor lowered her eyes. "Why?" The answer came immediately. "Because there was only one answer. Because you saved my life." Silence. Beautiful, painful, perfect silence. Then Adrian shook his head. "No." His eyes softened. "You didn't just save my life." The next words carried 15 years of emotion. "You changed it." Eleanor's breathing became uneven. For years, she had believed nobody remembered, nobody cared, nobody noticed. Yet this man, this powerful man, had remembered everything, even when she had forgotten herself. Unfortunately, the emotional storm wasn't finished, because Eleanor still carried another wound, a much deeper one. She looked away. "You were looking for someone else." Adrian frowned. "What?" "The woman from the accident." Her voice trembled. "The one you never forgot." Understanding finally appeared. Then horror, real horror. Because suddenly Adrian understood exactly what had happened. The misunderstanding, the lies, the distance. Everything. Eleanor. His voice softened. The woman I never forgot was you. She froze. Adrian stepped closer. The woman I searched for was you. Another step. The woman who saved my life was you. His eyes never left hers. And the woman I fell in love with, his voice broke again, was also you. The tears Eleanor had been fighting finally won. Years of insecurity, years of judgment, years of believing she wasn't enough. They all collapsed at once, because for the first time in her life, someone saw her completely. Not despite who she was, because of who she was. Meanwhile, inside the mansion, the gala had descended into chaos. The Ashcroft family scandal dominated every conversation. News spread rapidly. Evidence surfaced. Witnesses came forward. Business partnerships dissolved. Political allies disappeared. The fall was swift, brutal, public, exactly as betrayal deserved. Vivian's reputation shattered overnight. Gerald's influence collapsed soon afterward. Neither would recover. But outside the mansion, none of that mattered. Not anymore. Because Adrian and Eleanor finally stood face to face, without secrets, without misunderstandings, without lies. Weeks later, the transformation became impossible to ignore, not just in Adrian, in the entire estate. The same employees who once mocked Eleanor now respected her. The same guests who laughed at her now greeted her politely. The same people who judged her appearance now admired her character. The status reversal was complete, but the greatest change happened elsewhere. Martha Pierce received the medical treatment she desperately needed, not as charity, not as pity, but because Adrian ensured she had access to the best care available. Leo found stable employment. The financial burden crushing Eleanor for years finally disappeared. For the first time in a very long time, her family could breathe, and perhaps most importantly, Eleanor began seeing herself differently. Not through the eyes of strangers, not through years of criticism, but through truth. The truth that her value had never depended on appearance, never depended on approval, never depended on fitting someone else's standards. Her kindness, her courage, her loyalty, those were the things that mattered. Those were the things Adrian had fallen in love with. 6 months later, Adrian hosted another gala, this time for a different reason. The ballroom sparkled beneath crystal chandeliers. Guests filled the room. Music drifted through the air. And standing beside Adrian Moretti was Eleanor Pierce. Not hidden, not ignored, not ridiculed, celebrated, admired, loved. A stunning emerald gown flowed around her curvy figure. Her confidence illuminated the room far brighter than any jewelry ever could. People noticed, not because she had changed, because she had finally realized her worth. Then Adrian raised a glass. The room fell silent. His gaze settled on Eleanor, the same way it always did now. And for perhaps the first time in his life, the feared mafia boss looked completely at peace. To second chances. The room echoed the toast, but Adrian only saw one person, Eleanor, the girl from the storm. The woman who saved his life, the love he almost lost, and the future he never knew he needed.